I never thought I'd be the one telling this story. But here I am, 3 years later, still processing everything that happened that day. My name is Sarah, and I'm 26 years old. I live in a small town in Ohio where everyone knows everyone's business, and family gatherings are both a blessing and a curse. Growing up, I was always the middle child between my 2 sisters, Rebecca and Amanda. Rebecca, the eldest at 29, had this way of making everything about herself. She married her college sweetheart right after graduation, had 2 kids by 25, and lived in what she considered the perfect suburban house with a white picket fence. Amanda, my younger sister at 23, was the complete opposite. Wild, impulsive, and constantly jumping from one relationship to another. Then there was me, Sarah, caught somewhere in between their extremes. I worked as a marketing coordinator at a local company, lived in a modest apartment downtown, and had been dating Jake for about 8 months. Jake was different from any guy I'd ever been with. He was quiet, thoughtful, and had this mysterious quality about him that my sisters never understood. The problem started almost immediately after I introduced Jake to my family. It was a simple Sunday dinner at my parents' house, nothing fancy. Jake showed up wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, driving his old Honda Civic. He was polite, helped clear the table, and listened more than he spoke. But I could see it in Rebecca's eyes, that judgmental look she got whenever she didn't approve of something. After dinner, when Jake went to use the bathroom, Rebecca cornered me in the kitchen. Mom was loading the dishwasher, pretending not to listen, but I knew she was hanging on every word. "What's his story, Sarah?" Rebecca asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. "He seems nice enough, but what does he do for work?" I felt my cheeks flush. "He's in business," I said vaguely. Jake had always been private about his work, mentioning something about investments and consulting, but he never went into details. I didn't push because I respected his boundaries. "Business?" Amanda chimed in, having apparently been eavesdropping from the doorway. "That's pretty vague. Does he even have a real job?" The irritation in my chest started to build. Of course he has a real job. Not everyone needs to broadcast their entire life story at the first family dinner. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few months, every family gathering became an interrogation about Jake. Why didn't he talk about his family? Why was he so secretive about work? Why did he always seem to have free time during the day? The questions felt endless, and I found myself becoming defensive about a man I was falling deeply in love with. Jake never complained about my sister's attitude, but I could see it bothered him. He'd get quiet after family dinners, and sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window of my apartment with this faraway look in his eyes. When I asked if he was okay, he'd just pull me close and say everything was fine. But I knew it wasn't. The breaking point came during Rebecca's birthday party in March. She decided to throw herself a big celebration at the country club, inviting about 50 people, including extended family, neighbors, and friends from her social circle. I was nervous about bringing Jake because I knew Rebecca would be in full performance mode, but he insisted on coming to support me. The party was everything I expected: fancy decorations, catered food, and Rebecca holding court in the center of attention. Jake and I found a quiet corner table and tried to blend into the background, but it was impossible. People kept coming over to introduce themselves, asking Jake the same questions my sisters had been asking for months. I watched Jake handle each conversation with grace, deflecting personal questions with charm and redirecting attention back to whoever was speaking. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened slightly when someone pushed too hard for information about his work or family. About halfway through the party, Rebecca called for everyone's attention. She stood up at the head table, champagne glass in hand, ready to give some kind of speech. I thought she was going to thank everyone for coming, maybe share some sentimental memory about growing up. Instead, she launched into what felt like a performance designed to humiliate me. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "It means so much to have all the important people in my life celebrating with me. Family, friends, people who've been part of my journey for years. She paused, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on our table. Her gaze lingered on Jake for a moment before she continued. You know, birthdays are a time for reflection, and I've been thinking a lot about the people we choose to surround ourselves with. How important it is to be with people who are honest, who share our values, who aren't afraid to be open about who they are. My stomach dropped. I knew where this was heading, and I felt powerless to stop it. Some people here tonight have been part of my life for decades. Others are newer additions to our family circle. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And while I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, I also believe in protecting the people I love. Amanda, who had been standing near the bar, started walking toward Rebecca with this smug expression on her face. They had clearly planned this together, and I felt like prey being circled by predators. The room had gone quiet, everyone sensing the tension but not understanding what was happening. I reached for Jake's hand under the table, and he squeezed mine gently, but I could feel how rigid he had become. Rebecca continued, her voice getting louder. I guess what I'm trying to say is that when someone won't tell you what they do for a living, when they're secretive about their family, when they seem to have unlimited free time but no visible means of support, well, as a big sister, I worry. The humiliation was overwhelming. I felt heat creeping up my neck, my face burning with embarrassment. People were starting to whisper, looking back and forth between Rebecca and our table. I wanted to disappear, to crawl under the table and hide from the dozens of eyes suddenly focused on us. Amanda reached Rebecca's side and put her arm around her shoulder in a show of sisterly solidarity. She's right, you know. We're just looking out for Sarah. She's always been too trusting, too willing to see the best in people even when the red flags are obvious. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. Jake stood with me, his hand on my lower back, steady and supportive even as my world felt like it was crumbling around me. That's enough, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. You don't know what you're talking about. Rebecca's expression shifted to one of fake concern. Honey, we're just worried about you. You've been dating this guy for months and we still don't know anything about him. Don't you think that's strange? The worst part was that some of the people in the room were nodding in agreement. My own aunts and uncles, family friends who had watched me grow up, were looking at Jake with suspicion and at me with pity. I felt Jake's hand tighten on my back, and when I looked up at him, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or hurt. It was resolve. He looked down at me with such tenderness that it made my heart ache. Sarah, he said quietly, his voice carrying despite the low volume. I think it's time. Time for what? I whispered back, confused. He smiled, and for the first time all evening, it was completely genuine. Time for you to know everything. Jake stepped away from me and walked to the center of the room, positioning himself near where Rebecca was still standing with her champagne glass. The confidence in his movement was different from anything I'd seen before. Not the quiet, reserved Jake I knew, but someone who commanded attention without asking for it. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice clear and strong. I owe you all an apology, especially Rebecca and Amanda. You're absolutely right to be concerned about someone who's been secretive about his life. A man who cares about a woman should be willing to be completely open with her family. I felt my breath catch. What was he doing? My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been deliberately private about my life because I learned a long time ago that money changes how people see you. I wanted Sarah to know me for who I am, not what I have. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, quickly typing something. Within seconds, phones around the room were buzzing with notifications. People started looking at their screens, their expressions changing from curiosity to shock. I pulled out my own phone and saw that Jake had tagged me in a social media post. But it wasn't just any post. It was a link to a Forbes article titled Young Entrepreneurs Under 30, The Success Stories You Need to Know. And there, featured prominently with a professional headshot, was my Jake. The article described how Jake Morrison had built a tech consulting company from his dorm room into a multi-million-dollar business before he turned 25. It detailed his innovative approach to helping small businesses transition to digital platforms, his silent partnership in several successful startups, and his recent acquisition of a major software company. But that wasn't all. Jake was still standing in the center of the room, and now he was walking back toward me. As he approached, I noticed several people outside the country club's windows, and my heart nearly stopped. Parked directly in front of the main entrance was a red Ferrari, gleaming under the parking lot lights. The valet was standing next to it, holding keys and looking somewhat bewildered. Jake stopped in front of me and slowly got down on one knee. The entire room gasped, and I felt my legs go weak. He reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I know I should have told you everything sooner, but I needed to know that you loved me for who I am, not what I can provide. These past 8 months have been the happiest of my life, and I can't imagine my future without you in it." He opened the box, and I heard several people actually gasp out loud. Inside was the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen, a large diamond surrounded by smaller stones, clearly worth more than I made in several years. "I have spent every day falling more in love with your kindness, your intelligence, your loyalty to the people you care about. Even when your family questioned my intentions, you stood by me. Even when I know my secrecy frustrated you, you respected my boundaries." Tears were streaming down my face. I was vaguely aware that Rebecca and Amanda were standing behind Jake, their faces pale with shock and what looked like embarrassment. "Sarah Elizabeth Carter, will you marry me?" The room was completely silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I looked down at Jake, this man I'd fallen in love with for his quiet strength and gentle heart, and realized that nothing about him had actually changed. He was still the same person who helped clear my parents' dinner table, who listened to me complain about work stress, who held me when I cried during sad movies. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder. "Yes. Of course, yes." Jake slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. As he stood up and pulled me into his arms, the room erupted in applause and cheers. People were crowding around us, offering congratulations and asking to see the ring. But I was focused on something else entirely. Over Jake's shoulder, I could see Rebecca and Amanda standing frozen in place, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and what looked like genuine regret. After the initial excitement died down, Jake took my hand and led me toward the exit. As we passed my sisters, he stopped and turned to face them. "Rebecca, Amanda," he said calmly, "I understand why you were concerned about Sarah. She's an incredible woman, and she deserves people who will protect her. I hope you can forgive me for not being more open, and I hope we can start fresh." Rebecca's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Jake, we had no idea. I'm so sorry about tonight." Amanda stepped forward, her usual confidence completely gone. "We were just trying to look out for Sarah. We thought—" Jake held up his hand gently. "You don't need to explain. You were being good sisters. I respect that, even if I didn't appreciate the method." As we walked toward the exit, I felt like I was in a dream. The last hour had completely turned my world upside down, and I was struggling to process everything that had happened. Outside, the Ferrari was even more impressive up close. Jake took the keys from the valet and opened the passenger door for me, his hand steady on my back as I settled into the leather seat. As we drove away from the country club, I finally found my voice. "Jake, I can't believe this is real. The ring, the car, everything. Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet for a moment, focused on the road. "When I was younger, before I had money, I dated a girl who claimed to love me. But when I started having success, when the business took off, everything changed. Suddenly she was interested in where we went to dinner, what I bought her, what her friends thought of my success. I realized she had never actually loved me. She loved the idea of what I could provide. He glanced over at me, his expression serious. After that relationship ended, I made a decision. I would never again be with someone who was influenced by my wealth. I wanted to find someone who would love me if I was a janitor or a CEO. I reached over and put my hand on his arm. But Jake, I've been frustrated sometimes. When you were vague about work, when you wouldn't talk about your family. I know, and I'm sorry. I should have trusted you sooner. I should have realized that you're not like her. You proved that every day, especially tonight when you stood up for me even though you didn't have all the information. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, and I found myself staring at the ring on my finger. It was beautiful, but more than that, it represented something I was still trying to understand. Where are we going? I asked, as Jake turned onto a road I didn't recognize. He smiled. I want to show you something. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think tonight is that moment. We drove for about 20 minutes outside of town, eventually turning onto a long driveway that led to a house I couldn't see clearly in the darkness. Jake parked the car and came around to open my door, taking my hand as we walked toward the front entrance. The house was beautiful, modern but warm, with large windows and clean lines. Jake unlocked the front door and gestured for me to go first. Inside, the space was even more impressive. High ceilings, an open floor plan, and tasteful furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "This is gorgeous," I said, running my hand along the granite countertop in the kitchen. "Whose house is this?" "Mine," Jake said simply. "I bought it 6 months ago, but I've been waiting to show it to you because I was hoping." He trailed off, looking suddenly uncertain. Hoping what? That someday it might be ours. I felt my breath catch again. The evening had been full of surprises, but this felt different. This wasn't about money or grand gestures. This was about Jake sharing his real life with me, trusting me with his dreams and his future. We spent the next hour walking through the house, Jake showing me each room and explaining his vision for the space. There was a home office where he worked when he wasn't traveling, a guest room for when family visited, and a master bedroom with a view of the woods behind the property. But the room that made me cry was the one he showed me last. It was smaller than the others, with built-in bookshelves and a window seat overlooking the backyard. "I was thinking this could be a nursery someday," Jake said quietly. "If you want children, I mean. I know we haven't talked about it yet, but..." I turned to face him, and he must have seen the emotion in my eyes because he immediately pulled me into his arms. "I love you," I whispered against his chest. "I love you so much, and I'm sorry my sisters were so awful tonight." Jake pulled back and cupped my face in his hands. "Sarah, your sisters weren't awful. They were protective. It's one of the things I love about your family, how much you all care about each other, even when you express it in ways that are hard to understand. But they embarrassed you in front of all those people. They questioned your character and made assumptions. And they were right to be concerned about their sister dating a man who wouldn't be open about his life." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "If I had a sister, I'd want her friends to ask the same questions." I realized he was right, but it didn't make the memory of that evening any less painful. The look in Rebecca's eyes, the way Amanda had smirked, the whispers from our extended family, it all felt like a betrayal. Over the next few days, my phone was constantly buzzing with calls and messages from family members. Some were offering congratulations on the engagement, others were asking for details about Jake's business, and a few were clearly fishing for information about the size of the ring or the cost of the Ferrari. But the calls I was dreading most were from Rebecca and Amanda. They both left multiple voicemails, their voices a mixture of apology and excitement. Rebecca's messages were formal and stilted, clearly rehearsed. Amanda's were more emotional, with tears in her voice as she begged me to call her back. I ignored them for almost a week, focusing instead on Jake and the whirlwind of planning that had suddenly become my life. Jake had meetings with wedding planners, venue coordinators, and photographers. He approached our engagement with the same methodical efficiency he brought to his business, but always checking with me before making any decisions. The attention was overwhelming. Word had spread quickly through our small town about Jake's wealth and our engagement. People who had barely acknowledged me before were suddenly my best friends, inviting me to lunch and asking about wedding details. But the hardest part was seeing how differently people treated Jake. The same relatives who had looked at him with suspicion at Rebecca's party were now fawning over him, asking about his business, and hinting about investment opportunities. The hypocrisy was disgusting, and I could see how much it bothered Jake even though he never complained. Finally, a week after the engagement, I decided I needed to talk to my sisters. I called Rebecca first, asking if she and Amanda could meet me for coffee. We agreed to meet at the small cafe downtown where we used to go as teenagers. When I arrived, they were already there, sitting in a corner booth and looking nervous. Rebecca had clearly spent extra time on her appearance, wearing a dress that was more formal than necessary for a casual coffee meeting. Amanda looked like she'd been crying, her eyes red and puffy. I sat down across from them, and for a moment, none of us spoke. Finally, Rebecca cleared her throat. "Sarah, I owe you a huge apology. What I did at my party was inexcusable. I was trying to protect you, but I went about it completely wrong." Amanda nodded vigorously. We both did. We were so convinced that Jake was hiding something bad that we never considered he might be hiding something good. I studied their faces, trying to gauge their sincerity. Part of me wanted to forgive them immediately. They were my sisters, and despite everything, I loved them. But another part of me was still hurt by their public humiliation of the man I loved. "Do you understand how embarrassing that was?" I asked quietly. "How it felt to have you questioning Jake's character in front of 50 people." Rebecca's face crumpled. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I was showing off, trying to prove that I was looking out for you, but really I was just being cruel." Amanda reached across the table and took my hand. "Sarah, we were wrong. Not just about Jake, but about how we handled our concerns. We should have talked to you privately, asked questions in a way that didn't make you feel attacked." I felt some of the tension in my chest start to ease. Their apology felt genuine, and I could see the regret in their eyes. "The truth is," I said slowly, "I had some of the same questions you did. Jake's privacy frustrated me sometimes, and I wondered why he was so secretive. But I trusted him, and I trusted my feelings for him." Rebecca nodded. "And you were right to trust him. God, Sarah, when he got down on one knee and pulled out that ring. I wanted to disappear. I felt like such a fool." Amanda squeezed my hand. "We're happy for you, truly. Jake seems like an incredible man, and seeing how he handled our nastiness with such grace, it just made us realize how lucky you are to have found him." We talked for another hour, working through the hurt feelings and misunderstandings. By the time we left the cafe, things felt better between us, though I knew it would take time to fully repair the damage. That evening, I told Jake about the conversation with my sisters. He listened quietly, then pulled me close. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Better, I think." They were genuinely sorry, and I could see how much they regretted what happened. Jake was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I want you to know that I don't hold any grudges against your sisters. They were looking out for you, and even though their methods were harsh, their intentions came from love." I looked up at him, amazed once again by his capacity for forgiveness. "How are you so understanding about all this?" He smiled. "Because I love you, and they're part of you. Your family is going to be my family, and I want us all to have a good relationship." Over the following weeks, Rebecca and Amanda both made genuine efforts to get to know Jake better. Rebecca invited us to dinner at her house, and Amanda suggested we all go out together for a casual evening. The conversations were still somewhat awkward, but there was a clear effort on everyone's part to move forward. Jake handled it all with his characteristic grace, never making my sisters feel bad about their initial reaction, but also not pretending that nothing had happened. He was honest about his business, his family background, and his reasons for being private, helping them understand his perspective without being defensive. The wedding planning continued to be a whirlwind of activity. Jake insisted on handling most of the costs, which were substantial given the size of the event we were planning. My parents were overwhelmed by his generosity, and I could see them struggling to understand how their middle daughter had ended up with someone so wealthy. But the most meaningful conversations happened during the quiet moments Jake and I spent together. Away from the excitement and chaos of wedding planning, we talked about our future, our dreams, and our fears. One evening, as we sat on the porch of his house watching the sunset, Jake turned to me with a serious expression. "Sarah, I need you to understand something about the life we're going to have together. The money, the business, the attention. It's not always easy. There will be people who want things from us, who will treat us differently because of what we have." I nodded, having already seen glimpses of this in the weeks since our engagement. "But more than that," Jake continued, "I need you to know that my success doesn't define me. The business could fail tomorrow, and I'd still be the same person. I need to know that you understand that." I took his hand, feeling the weight of the engagement ring on my finger. "Jake, I fell in love with you when I thought you were just a guy who worked in business consulting and drove a Honda Civic. Nothing about who you are has changed for me." He smiled, and I could see the relief in his eyes. That's what I needed to hear. The wedding was beautiful, held at a venue that Jake had chosen specifically because it reminded him of the place where we had our first date. My sisters were both bridesmaids, and they handled their roles with grace and genuine happiness. Rebecca gave a speech that was heartfelt and sincere, acknowledging her mistakes and welcoming Jake into our family. Amanda cried through the entire ceremony, later telling me that seeing us together had restored her faith in true love. But the moment that meant the most to me was when Jake's family arrived. He had been vague about his relatives, mentioning only that his parents lived in California and that he had a younger brother. What he hadn't told me was that his father was a successful businessman who had built his own company from nothing, and his mother was a retired teacher who had devoted her life to educational philanthropy. Jake's parents were warm and genuine, clearly proud of their son but not defined by his success. His mother, Margaret, pulled me aside before the ceremony to tell me how happy Jake had been since we started dating. "He's been different since he met you," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "More relaxed, more like the young man he was before business took over his life. Thank you for giving him that." As Jake and I exchanged vows, I thought about everything that had led us to this moment. The months of getting to know each other, the challenges with my family, the revelations about his wealth, and the decisions we'd made about our future together. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Jake kissed me with such tenderness that I forgot about the 100 people watching us. In that moment, it was just us, just two people who had found each other despite the complications and misunderstandings. At the reception, Rebecca and Amanda both made toasts that were beautiful and heartfelt. Rebecca spoke about family, about the importance of supporting each other even when we make mistakes. Amanda talked about love, about finding someone who sees the best in you even when you don't see it in yourself. But the toast that made me cry was from Jake's best man, his college roommate Michael. He talked about knowing Jake for over a decade, about watching him build his business and achieve incredible success, but also about seeing him struggle with loneliness and the challenges of finding genuine connection. "Jake has always been generous with his resources," Michael said, "but he's been careful with his heart." When he told me about Sarah, when I saw the way his whole face lit up when he talked about her, I knew she was different. She didn't just accept his success. She made him remember who he was before he had any success at all. As the evening wound down, Jake and I snuck away from the reception for a few minutes alone. We walked to the edge of the venue's property, where we could see the lights of the town below us. "Do you have any regrets?" Jake asked, his arm around my waist. I thought about the question seriously. The past year had been full of challenges, surprises, and changes I never could have anticipated. But as I looked at my husband, I knew my answer. None, I said firmly. Even the difficult parts led us here. Jake smiled and pulled me closer. I love you, Sarah Morrison. I love you too, I replied, still getting used to the sound of my new name. 3 years later, as I sit in the nursery of our home, holding our 6-month-old daughter Emma, I think about that night at Rebecca's party and how different my life is now. Jake and I have built something beautiful together, based on trust, respect, and genuine love for each other. My sisters have become some of Jake's biggest supporters, and our family gatherings are now filled with laughter instead of tension. Rebecca often jokes that she's proud of her matchmaking skills, claiming that her harsh questioning helped Jake realize how much he loved me. Amanda has settled down with a wonderful man who treats her with the kindness she deserves. But the most important thing I've learned is that real love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about finding someone who sees you completely, who accepts your flaws and celebrates your strengths, and who chooses to build a life with you regardless of what challenges come your way. Jake still drives the Ferrari sometimes, but more often than not, we're in the practical SUV we bought when I got pregnant. He still works hard and travels for business, but he's also learned to set boundaries and prioritize our family time. And sometimes, when Emma is sleeping and we're sitting together in the evening, Jake will look at me and say, "Thank you for seeing me before you knew any of this. Thank you for loving me when I was just a guy with a Honda Civic." That's when I know, without any doubt, that we found something real. Something that would survive whether we had millions of dollars or just enough to get by. Something that my sister's criticism couldn't shake, and that public scrutiny couldn't damage. We found each other, and everything else was just details.